welcome back to a new episode of Let's Talk Golf. I'm your host, PGA professional Mark Guttenberg, and I'm proud to bring you part 2 of my interview with Leonard Shapiro. Leonard Shapiro is a Hall of Fame sports writer who covered golf for the Washington Redskins for over 30 years as their beat reporter, and he started covering the game of golf in 1991. If you missed the first show, just a few of his credentials. Len is the author of 7 books, including an expose of illegal college sports called Athletes for Sale. He wrote an autobiography with Sam Huff and a biography of John Thompson, the coach of the Georgetown University. And Len is also, since 1991, one of the top golf sports writers we have. He has covered over 100 majors. He's been featured in many publications, including Golf Magazine, Golf Digest, Links, Golf for Women, Virginia Golfer, and so much more. I really enjoyed my interview with Len before, where he talked to us about, number one, his induction into the NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2002 in the writer's wing. We talked about his major, some of his experiences, some of the golfers that he has covered, some of his embarrassing moments, what it's like to interview these guys, and I really hope that you were able to listen to episode number 1. Now we're going to get to episode number 2. We're going to hear about his Pulitzer Prize nomination and so much more. So stay tuned for our next episode of Let's Talk Golf. So glad you came back. Welcome back to part 2 of our interview with Len Shapiro, the great sports writer who's in the NFL sports writing wing of the Hall of Fame. I want to continue with your fabled career. It's pretty amazing to me. I'm sitting here with the Hall of Fame guy, but what's even equally amazing is in 1998, you were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for the obituary you wrote about the legendary Washington Post sports columnist Shirley Povich. That had to be a career highlight. So you were nominated. First, I'll bring up the bad part. Who won the award that year?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay, good. Good for you.
Whoever it was deserved it, no matter what.
But, yeah, that must have been pretty special.
Well, it was. It was a story that I was assigned to, which was a great honor for me. For people who don't know who Shirley Povich is, Povich hired me. Shirley Povich was the sports editor of the Washington Post in the 1920s, and he wrote his last column a couple of days before he died at the age of 93, covering an Orioles game. He had written a piece about an Orioles game, and a couple of days later passed away. So when they asked me to do it, I was nervous as hell. And this is a guy who literally kept the Washington Post alive for many, many years, long before Watergate in the 40s and the 50s. Because the first thing you picked up in the morning, if you read the Washington Post, was Shirley Povich's column. It was called This Morning. It was called This Morning. And they asked me to write his obituary, which I spent about 2 months doing. Again, a lot of people who don't know much about newspapers think that some of these obituaries are done, the day that person dies. No, you do them in advance. You do them months, sometimes years ahead. And Povich was one that they wanted to do ahead. And I had done most of the story about a year before actually he had died. But I had talked to people about him. I talked to people like Abe Poland, who owned back then the Washington Wizards and the hockey team, who knew Shirley growing up in Washington in the 40s. Talked to a whole bunch of people. Ben Bradley, the editor of the Post, who was his boss at the end. Talked to some athletes. I talked to Frank Howard, the great baseball player for the Washington Senators. And 6 or 7 different interviews, and then put it all together, and then wrote what I still to this day consider the best story I ever wrote for the Washington Post. And the fact it was about Shirley Povich, who actually hired me in 1969, who became a great friend, and was royalty. I mean, you talk about sports writing royalty. There were about 4 or 5 guys around the country: Jim Murray in Los Angeles, Red Smith in New York, Shirley Povich in Washington, and those were pretty much the big 3 in America. And Povich, I mean, I was working for a guy in 1970, and for the next 27 years, who actually was covered Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney in 1920 something. Wow. He covered the fight.
He was there.
and then became a war correspondent in Japan or covering in the Pacific. Just the greatest human being you'll ever meet in your life. So it was a great honor and a great thrill.
What an amazing mentor to have in a sport like that. But for me, it was Bill Strasbaugh Jr. He was
sure.
the pro at
Columbia
Country Club. Got me my first job in golf. Gave me lessons when I was 16. Even to this day, I'll be standing on the lesson tee. I'll fold my arm in a certain way, and I'm just emulating my mentor.
Right,
so we learned so much from them. Well, this is earlier in the first show you made reference to back in the 70s when you were hired to do high school sports and cover all that. So this is a question I have for you that you might actually have an answer for, and you'll probably know these guys. So when I first became a golf professional in 1974. Maury Fitzgerald wrote for the Post, and Dick Slay wrote for the Washington Star.
Very well.
And they used to cover the Mid-Atlantic PGA Pro-Ams events, our major events. It was always great for the local pros because you couldn't wait to get the paper in the morning and go to the sports page and look to see if your name made the paper. If you won the Pro-Am or if you made the paper, your lesson book filled up. I mean, it was great for local golf, and it certainly was the main reason I bought the paper. I'm not going to lie, but then all of a sudden they stopped doing it, and I'm wondering if you have any insights. First we thought, well, I guess we're just not that important, or advertising space, or whatever. Do you have any, since you were there back in those days?
Quick story first. I did cover one of those. I covered the Middle Atlantic PGA at Hobbits Glen in Columbia, Maryland, when a guy named Chuck Thorpe, who was the brother of Jim Thorpe.
Well,
you know Chuck? And he won
That was the Mid-Atlantic Open.
Was it the middle? Whatever.
Yeah,
at
it was
Hobbits
open
Glen.
to non...
Yeah, it
wasn't
wasn't
just have to be PGA Club Pro. It was open to
any
pros in the area. Yeah.
But
Jim Thorpe played in it,
I covered that. That was one of my first early golf assignments. But anyway.
I probably played in it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's happened, okay? We used to also take golf results. We used to take results from the country clubs.
Exactly.
Team
Local,
matches or
all that.
Somebody would have a tournament. The Post ran out of space. I mean, the decision was made, and golfers are not the only ones who are complaining. If you notice, you don't see any race charts in the Washington Post anymore from Laurel or Pimlico or the horse racing people are very upset and have been for about the last 20 years. Same with local golf. I think it's a mistake not to do it. But those decisions, because the newspaper industry has changed dramatically, they did all these reader surveys, and they decided to go more national sports than they did local sports. And unfortunately, local golf was one of the casualties. I still think we will write 2 or 3 paragraphs, somewhere in the paper, maybe not, about the Maryland Open or the MAPCA Championships or any of those things, but we don't, and it's sort of sad, and it's a different era, and part of it is because space has shrunk, the advertising revenue is down, a lot of newspapers are folding. There also was a thought that local papers, weekly papers, could do a better job of it, and so we let them do it, and I think in a lot of ways it was a mistake,
Well, it certainly makes a lot of sense. It had major implications for a young up-and-coming golf pro, not only for the lesson book aspect, but back in the late 70s, when you wanted to interview for a head pro job, golf is so much different now. Now it's all about business. They don't care if you can break 90 if you're the head pro. They don't care if you give lessons. It's how many green fees you can run through, and it's a business. And a lot of management companies hire a pro just to manage the golf business. But if you were a tournament winner and you interviewed for a job who was a great merchandiser or knew the business, the accounting end of it, you always got the job. The better players always got the better jobs. And unfortunately, because they put so much time into being players, they were terrible businessmen. Yeah. So a lot of these guys lost their jobs, but it was such a major setback for young up-and-coming players when they stopped covering it. But you're giving a fair answer, and certainly, the newspaper business, now that everything's online, it's gotten tougher. I remember a couple of years ago, I was asked to write a bunch of columns for internet. This was maybe 10 years ago. Nobody reads that stuff. I'm not going to waste my time. I'd rather write for a newspaper. And I'm old school. I still love writing, get my hands on the paper. But that's some pretty good stuff.
The business has changed. Your business has changed dramatically, and ours has too.
Absolutely. So there's a question I bet you've been asked 100 times. Who's the greatest golfer of all time in your opinion, and why?
Jack Nicklaus,
Jack, I'm with you.
18 major championships, won one at 46. How many runner-ups, Mark?
Oh gosh,
over 20.
It was
maybe 30.
More than that. Yeah, it was up there. And
runner-ups,
top 3. Yeah,
yeah.
About
I mean, and hit the ball 300 yards with equipment from back then.
Yeah,
I mean, or 280, 290. Yeah, he's the best now. Tiger Woods, totally different era. Easily, in my mind, number 2. But because of the way he played, I mean, he became injury prone. He didn't take care of him. He did all the wrong stuff. I mean, he was jumping out of planes with Navy SEALs and Green Berets because his dad was a Green Beret. He was running. He was running 2 hours. He was lifting weights he had no business. And his body is shot basically. Mm-hmm. But in terms of who did the most for golf, Arnold Palmer brought the game to the American public. People flocked to the game because of Arnie, because he was so photogenic. But to me, the player, the best pure player in my lifetime, and maybe anybody. Well, I think he's the greatest player of all time.
You put him over Bobby Jones and Ben Hogan.
Yes.
I would agree with you 100%. And what the guy stands for and stood for. He's the epitome of a class act, sports champion, sports hero. Like you said, he give you the shirt off your back, donate to charity. A lot of these guys do that because they need a tax write-off. But,
but Jack was, and I'll tell you, also a scene I'll never forget. His grandson, one of his grandchildren, drowned in a pool.
I remember
in Florida.
Steve's son, I think.
Steve's son. And this doesn't put him. This is not what makes him the number 1 golfer in the world, but just this kind of guy he was.
Yeah.
A week later, they were having a tournament in South Florida. I think it was to promote Children's Hospital, and Jack had a press conference, and it was the first time he would have been available. So I was sent, and I asked him. I said, Jack, none of us wanted to be there. Nobody wanted to. And I asked him I said, Jack, and I knew him a little bit. He knew me. Why are you doing this? Why are you? You don't have to do this. He says, listen. He says, I made a commitment to this event, and I made a commitment to the charity, and I am mortified and devastated by what has happened. But life has to go on, and I decided to do this. And that's the kind of guy I was. I mean, he just this was not about the money. This was not about promoting himself. It was the right thing to do, and he did the right thing. And there are very few athletes. Well, I shouldn't say that. A lot of guys won't do the right thing. Jack always did.
Yeah, I got to agree with you. I was lucky like you. At a young age, at 10 years old, I knew I was going to be a golf pro.
Yeah.
And I studied everything about that man. I mean, if you look around my library, I've got every one of his books, and I watched every one of his tournaments and his majors. When you ask how many segments, I normally would know that at the top of my head, but I'm glad you said that. And you're a highly regarded speaker as well as a sports writer on a variety of topics, and including the Tiger Woods phenomenon. So, having somebody like you here, it'd be a shame to not get your opinion on some of these things. In fact, you covered all 14 of Tiger's major victories.
I did.
In your opinion, will we ever see him in the winner's circle again?
I think he might win another tournament.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. I think he's really working hard to get back, but he's never going to dominate the game the way he once did. No. But I think he can win again.
Well, I'm
by
glad
sheer force of nature and his head.
When you think of some of the things that he's been able to do by his head and the sheer force of nature, whatever, it's been incredible. Some of the shots he's pulled up in those moments. So somebody that's got that in them, if he can heal his body and his mind, I would love it. It's great for the game. Say what you want about his off-course antics. He's done a lot for the game. We owe a lot to Tiger.
Oh, absolutely.
For the purses we have today, and I'm certainly pulling for him. Whether it's going to happen or not, who knows? So here's a good one for you. Now, I know you've written 7 books. I have to shamelessly admit I haven't read any of them yet.
It's allowed.
I'm proud to know
none of them about golf, though.
Well, that's probably why. Yeah. Although nothing about Tiger in any of your books. Okay, so my wife Leslie is an LPGA professional, and I were staff writers for a magazine called Pros and Hackers magazine for 11 years, and we would always proof and edit each other's articles before submitting them. So you're married to an accomplished journalist and author, Vicky Moon. Does she proof your columns and your books before they go to print?
Yes, she does she does.
She does.
Well, she's not a big sports fan, so
She's
but
not.
yeah, we look at each other's stuff before it goes in. Yeah, but she didn't when I was working at the Post. She did not. But at a newspaper, you have a whole layer of editing. It's not just what you turned in is going to get in the paper. I mean, it goes to about 4 different people will see that story, and we'll edit it for content, for grammar, for punctuation, for that you don't libel somebody, that you don't defame anybody. So it's a very rigorous editing project. Now, since I'm not at the paper, we also have to put a plug in. We are now editing a magazine locally called Country Spirit magazine, which covers our area. And she and I are putting out, and we both read each other's stuff before it goes in there. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you? Yeah. I used to hate it, but I was always glad because I know she had better grammar than I did.
But you got to get a second. You have to have another set of eyes on it.
You really
can't do it.
Now, what about like titles for your columns? Did you always write your titles?
No. The writers don't write the headlines.
Interesting.
Never. Now I do now.
You do.
I do because this magazine it's like a 4-person staff. I do everything. I sell the advertising. But I have fun doing it. It keeps my mind going. But no, somebody else is writing the headlines. Somebody else writes the captions for the pictures. I might suggest something every once in a while, but no, never did that. Now I did for my first column in high school. You know what it was called, Mark? Splinters from the Bench.
I like it.
Which I kept through college.
Yeah, well, that's not bad. I mean, I always wrote my titles for Pros and Hackers magazine. In fact, one of my favorites was "Let the Truth Be Told About the Left Arm Fold," and that's the position.
Oh, great! Yeah.
I used to have a bunch of them, and I was always proud of that. I would be catchy. Leslie would always say, "Mark, those are so corny." But then I started writing for Fauquier Times Democrat and a couple other local papers, and I would always give them what I thought was a really catchy title, and they would always rewrite it. I said, that's not even what the article's about. So that was always a frustrating thing for me, but I learned. So listen, I'm glad you kind of brought up what you're doing now, because what is there left for you to do in this business? Do you have a bucket list you're working on? Tell us more about it.
You never know. I've been around for, I'm 70 years old. I'm editing this magazine. I do a lot of freelance writing. I do try and get stories into the Post every once in a while. I write for the Virginia Golfer on a fairly regular basis. I write for Golf Digest every once in a while. I write for some other publications. I write for a website called Global Golf Post when I go to an event. So I'm still active. And writers write, and I also teach. I teach a course.
Tell us about that.
Well, I went to the University of Wisconsin. I've taught...
Go Badgers, right?
I'm a Badger. My email is badgerlen@AOL, if anybody wants to complain about what we're talking about.
There you go.
Badgerlen@AOL.com.
Gotcha.
I'm not giving you the phone number, though.
Okay.
And I've taught journalism, sports journalism at Wisconsin 3 different times. This fall, I've been teaching at Shenandoah University a course called Sports in the Media, and having a good time doing it. And so I keep active. Writers write, and I still like to write. I'm editing a magazine. My son, up until recently, was a writer for the Washington Post as well in the Metro section, so I love to follow him.
What's his name?
His name is Taylor Shapiro. His byline was T. Reese Shapiro, T for Taylor, Reese Shapiro. I said, Taylor, what's wrong with Taylor Shapiro? And he said to me, what's the matter, Dad? You never heard of F. Scott Fitzgerald? I said, okay, so I kept my mouth shut.
That's funny. My son's name is Taylor, and he's an international DJ. But
wow.
He goes by DJ T-Gut.
Oh, wow.
So we call him
T-Gut. Yeah, that's great.
I've been on the TaylorMade staff for 30 years. Yeah. I always call him Taylor Made by the Guttenbergs.
Right.
So, so any more books maybe in your future?
Well, I've had a couple of chances. I'm thinking about it. Yeah. But editing a magazine is more time consuming than you can imagine, and book and teaching and all is. Books are hard. I've done 7 different books. I did a biography of John Thompson, the father, the great Georgetown basketball coach, who I actually started covering when he was a high school coach. when I first came to Washington in 1969, he was coaching a high school team that became a national power and then got to Georgetown in the early 70s. I did a book on him. I did a biography with Sam Huff, the great middle linebacker, Hall of Famer for the New York Giants, who I idolized growing up as a kid, and then wound up writing his book, which was kind of cool.
Didn't he live near you? Or
he lives in Middleburg.
Yeah,
he lives in Middleburg. Sadly, and has some dementia now because he took way too many hits on the football field. And did a book way back in the early 70s with a colleague of mine named Ken Denlinger, who also covered golf for a while, about college basketball and football recruiting. That was sort of the first book to talk about the real scandal involved in recruiting of these athletes, and it's still going on, and it's something I'm very proud of. So I've thought about maybe revisiting that, but I'm old, Mark. I'm not sure I have the energy to do another book, and it's time for the younger guys to do it.
Well, we're both on the back nine of life, but we still got a few holes left to
I
play.
got plenty left, but
I
need some more. I need a few more birdies and eagles, though.
You need to get out there with the Wednesday whackers and just keep beating on those guys. It's been a real honor and a pleasure to have you come talk about your life, your career, and about insights in the world of golf that very few of us get to hear about. So I want to thank you. Maybe we'll hear a podcast show from you one day in the future. I'd be glad to help you get started in that realm.
I'm honored to be on with you, Mark, and you've done a great job. I know you're one of the best teachers in America, and I know Leslie is too, and it's been a thrill. I've written a few pieces about you too,
you have.
And a budding golf architect.
Well, that's true. I just wrote
a story about a hole you designed.
Hubert Fitz and the Virginia golfer, which I read. It was a great story, and that's the thing. As we get older in life, the relevancy issue comes up, and what can we do to keep fueling the fire? And so, like you, I'm looking for new passions and new directions. So I wish you the best, and I thank you so much for coming on.
And I forgot to mention the 7 grandchildren. That keeps you busy too.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm still working on just my son getting married, but I think that's coming.
Happen.
Although I'm not going to push it. I'm in no hurry. Well, Len, thanks again for coming on to Let's Talk Golf, and I look forward to many more conversations with you in the future.
My pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You bet. What a great opportunity to talk to a great man. Len Shapiro is one of the legends in sports writing. What an honor that he would come and spend time with us and share his insights into this great game that we all love so much. I hope you had a chance to listen to the first episode. It was launched on November 6th, and Len shared so much with us in these 2 episodes. I'm eternally grateful, and I hope you guys will come back and listen to our next episode of Let's Talk Golf. I'm your host, PGA professional Mark Guttenberg. As always, go to my website, guttenbergsgolf.com. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, LinkedIn. We're everywhere. We hope you will continue to support us and listen to us. So it's time to say goodbye, and once again, thanks for listening to Let's Talk Golf.